Hello, and welcome to episode 116 of Spurbs Herbs. Today, we are going to be talking about one of the most common Western herbs around, purple coneflower or Echinacea purpurea. As always, I am your presenter, Dr. Greg Sperber. Let's get into it. Today, we'll be discussing a very popular Western herb, Echinacea purpurea or purple coneflower. This herb is commonly recommended for treating and preventing colds. Does it have other uses? Does it work? Is it safe? How does Chinese medicine interpret its actions? We will answer these questions and more. And as usual, we will be adding something a little different. We are going to look at AI again. Is going to be another illuminating discussion of herbs, so please join us. So over the last few years, we've taken a look several times at artificial intelligence and whether or not it could be helpful with herbs. In general, I have found it to be interesting, but way more often to be wrong than helpful, even to the point of making up facts and citations. So it's been a little while. I've been doing this about every year. There have been some big leaps in AI, not to mention a lot more of a backlash since the last time we looked at this subject. So let's look at what I did and what were the results. So I used Claude from Anthropic, which is widely considered the best out there, though I did not use their latest model, Mythos, which is considered kind of the best at this point as I'm recording this. I mean, I think both Meta and ChatGPT just announced or just released their latest models, which are supposed to be on par with Mythos at this point. They haven't been head-to-head tested yet, but still Mythos, I think, is still considered the latest and greatest. I wanted to see if I could if it could help me develop my podcast episodes, and I had 3 of them to do, so I used them for all 3. The episodes were very different. One was today's episode about Echinacea, which has a different format from the Chinese single herb episode, which was the next one, and quite different from the Chinese formula episode after that. For each, I uploaded the same style of episodes I've done in the past, the same style of the formula, the single or the Western herbs, which ended up being about 20 to 50 episodes for each of them. So I set up 3 different setups. One for the Chinese singles, one for the Chinese formula, and one for I call world herbs. And then I uploaded all the episodes I had done already on those. And it's between 20 and 50 for each of those. It's about 20-ish for the formulas and 20-ish for the world herbs and about 50-ish for the Chinese single herbs. And so I uploaded all of that. I also uploaded some portion of texts that were relevant to each episode, and then prompted Claude to construct a slide presentation based on the previous episodes and using the attached materials. The first episode used an older AI model, mainly because I didn't realize I could change it. I thought it was on the latest and greatest, but it wasn't. So I checked it, and so it was that one. It took the longest, which is not surprising for an older model, and only came up with 13 relatively dense slides, where I usually have at least 50 slides on one of these. Today's comes in at 49 slides, so almost 50 slides. And while they did have a bibliography, which was pretty accurate, I found 1 or 2 of them was interesting in that I couldn't find, the reference was there, but it was like a book and I didn't have the book and I couldn't get the book. So I don't know where the source, how the model got the book, but it was there and it seemed to be accurate. I couldn't check the quotes and I didn't use them, but it did not have individual citations. So like you notice if you're watching what I'm doing, everything I say has a citation to it, and it didn't do that. It just had a bibliography at the end. I don't like that. So I asked it to run it again with individual citations and added that to my instructions for the other episodes. So you can put in rules for each of these projects. And that was one of the ones that I did. What came out of the first one, the Echinacea, this one was helpful at least a little. I had to really confirm each of the references and citations, though I did find some small mistakes. It was pretty good in that realm. The prose was a little too excited for my taste. Those I did use, those I did use a little bit in my episode, though. I did use it a little bit in my episode. I repeated this for the next two episodes, and it was even more useful, especially with some of the more technical and time-consuming aspects, like tone marks. I spent a lot of time putting together tone marks and actually finding putting in the correct Chinese characters and all that. And I didn't have to do that. It was all accurate. It definitely saved me some time, but not a ton, though the summaries were pretty darn good. The summaries were nice. One of them was a little too rah-rah, but the other ones weren't too bad. I tweaked them and kind of used them. So what was interesting to me was I asked the AI to do one episode on a Saturday. This is the third episode. And it did it way more quickly and actually had 44 slides, which is almost my normal thing. And actually had a complete something a little different. If you've listened to me quite a bit, this is something a little different, just a little bit off of topic, but sort of in the realm of herbs. And it had a complete one. It was actually very interesting. I didn't have enough time to confirm it. I may use it in the future, add something to it because it did seem a little small, but that wasn't bad. 44 slides with a little something different. It really took it to heart. What was interesting about this, it was super fast. Like the others took, I don't know how long it took. I had to leave basically and come back. And so it took at least a half an hour probably to do the other ones. This one, it seemed like it only took about 5 or 10 minutes. It had much more on it. And what was interesting, I wonder if this was because there weren't as many people using the AI model on the weekend. Something for me to keep an eye on. I want to kind of check that and see if that's an actual issue. Like when during the time of day and week is it best to use these artificial intelligence models? I listened to several podcasts on technology and AI, not AI bro podcasts like AI is the next greatest thing, man. No, nothing like that, but serious techie podcasts. And you can't really listen to tech these days without talking about AI. And I would say my thoughts at the end of this process is what they've been saying for a little while. AI can help save time, but is best when used as a helper rather than rely on it to do the work for you. And so that's sort of my take home message from using AI in today's and the next couple of episodes. And so useful. I'm probably going to continue using it, but definitely not rely on it. It was just it helped on a few things, and other things I just didn't care for what it wrote. It shortened a lot of stuff that I would have made longer. The citations were okay. I asked from an APA style, which is how I do it. That's the American Psychological Association style. That was just kind of what I had to do when I was doing my capstone projects. I'm pretty good at it. It's kind of become the de facto standard in our profession. And so I wouldn't say they were bang on APA style. They were close, but not exactly how I would interpret APA style. So there you go. So it wasn't perfect, but it was interesting. I would not just go with an AI to create this podcast, but it is helpful, at least along the edges. And so, yeah, I'm going to continue using it probably, but not if it ever takes me more time to kind of get set up and everything. I think now that I've set it all up, because it took me a little while, I mean, not a huge amount of time to upload everything, but I will continue to use it. But if it takes too much time, I'll pass on it at this point. And maybe I can refine how I use it in the future. So to me, having done this another 2 or 3 times in the past, I didn't count them, but at least 2 or 3 times in the past, it feels like the artificial intelligence is way stronger than it's been in the past. Nowhere near where it is, where I'd like it to be, or where it's incredibly useful, but certainly much more useful. I could use it as a companion as I'm preparing podcasts, and I would never use it only to create podcasts. I'm way too particular to do that, but it was an interesting test for these 3 episodes. So with that, let's get on to the rest of our episode today. And today we're going to be talking about purple coneflower, or Echinacea purpurea. It's in the family Asteraceae, which we've actually been talked about quite a bit over the years. Asteraceae is the daisy family. We'll talk about that in just a little bit. The particular species is Echinacea purpurea L in parentheses. Remember, parentheses are it was categorized by whoever L represents. In this case, L represents Linnaeus, who's actually the first person who categorized and created the system of categorization for botany and other species. So whenever you see L, it's among one of the older categorized, I'm going to say, plants at this point, but also species and what have you. In parentheses means that it has been updated. In this case, it's been updated by the botanist Moench, Moench. And other species that may be used medicinally include Echinacea augustifolia, and Echinacea pallida, Pallida. And in my readings, we're going to talk about this a little bit, but in my readings, especially when you're buying something over the counter, you're getting an Echinacea preparation, it can include any of these three species, though Echinacea purpurea is kind of considered the hallmark of these species. Augustifolia is actually supposed to be pretty darn strong medicinally, and Pallida is not as strong as the others medicinally, though it is still used. The medicinal part, depending on where you go, I put here the aerial parts, which are the flower and stems and the roots, which is pretty much the whole plant. And you'll see some people say the whole plant. The other people say no, the aerial parts are the strongest medicinally. So it kind of depends on your source, but most sources will say the majority, at least, if not the whole plant, has medicinal purposes. Other names for this are rather than purple cone flowers, it can just be coneflower, eastern purple coneflower, purple Kansas coneflower, hedgehog coneflower, American coneflower, red sunflower, comeflower, and in Chinese, zishu hua and songguo zhu are the Chinese names. Those are from different sources, and I don't really have a great backup. It does seem to me that Songguo Zhu had a little bit more behind it. I only saw Zishu Hua in one source, which was not a bad source, but not the strongest source. And Songguo Zhu was in a stronger source, but it may have only been one source as well. So I'm not positive about these Chinese names. Okay, let's talk a little bit about that Asteraceae family. We've covered this family often, and here we are again. According to Britannica, the Asteraceae family, also called Compositae, is commonly known as the aster, daisy, or composite family of the flowering plant order Asterales. It includes more than 1,620 genera and 23,600 species of herbs, shrubs, and trees distributed throughout the world, and is one of the largest plant families in existence. There are many well-known plants in this family, including many garden ornamentals, weeds, including dandelion, ragweed, and thistle, food crops like lettuce, artichoke, safflower, sunflower, and endive, and as well as several Chinese herbs. Members of the family have flower heads composed of many small flowers called florets that are surrounded by bracts, which are leaf-like structures. Bell-shaped disc florets form the center of each head. Strap-shaped red florets extend out like petals from the center and are sometimes reflexed or bent back. Another interesting article by Rolnick and Aulis agree with this overview and looked at how this family plays a role in human health, including antioxidant, anti-inflammatory, and antimicrobial activities, which you're going to see our herb today has most of those as well as diuretic and wound healing properties. And Echinacea definitely has some wound healing properties as well. So that's the Asteraceae family. So next we have let's describe Echinacea. So Echinacea derives from the Greek echinos, or which literally means hedgehog or sea urchin, and for the and it's that's based on the spiny central cone of the coneflower, and purpurea means reddish purple. It is a herbaceous perennial growing up to about 120 centimeters or 47 inches tall and roughly 25 centimeters wide at maturity. 25 centimeters is about 10 inches wide. It has a cone-shaped flowering heads with drooping reddish purple ray florets surrounding a raised, spiny orange-brown disc of florets. Blooms throughout summer into autumn, depending on the climate. Native to the Northeast, Southeast, and Midwest United States, most common in the Ozarks and the Mississippi and Ohio River valleys. Habitats include dry, open woods, prairies, and barrens. The individual flowers are hermaphroditic, which means it has both male and female aspects, and have alternating leaves that are oval to lanceolate, so lance-like. The inflorescence or group of flowers around the stem is a capitulum or dense compound flower head composed of numerous tiny stalkless flowers or florets grouped tightly together on a single base, also known as the receptacle. And these are typical of the Asteraceae family, which we described earlier. The fruit is an achene, a type of simple dry fruit containing a single seed that nearly fills the pericarp, but does not adhere to it. So that is a good description of the plant Echinacea. Let's talk a little bit about its history. Echinacea species were the most widely used medicinal plants among Plains indigenous peoples, with documented use by at least 15 to 19 tribes. Lewis and Clark shipped roots and seeds of Echinacea back to President Jefferson in 1805 as a notable botanical find. By the late 1800s, it entered eclectic medicine, and what he was famous for doing that was H.C.F. Meyer in his book, Meyer's Blood Purifier from 1885, and it became a staple of early 20th century American herbal practice. It gained renewed popularity in Europe from the 1930s onward and later in the US as a cold and flu remedy, though this specific use was not the plant's original traditional purpose. Native Americans learned of E. augustifolia, E meaning Echinacea augustifolia, by observing elk seeking out the plants and consuming them when sick or wounded, and identified those plants as elk root. So that's one of the names, elk root. So let's talk about some of those traditional uses. Echinacea was one of the basic antimicrobial herbs of eclectic medicine from the mid-19th century through the early 20th century, and its use was documented for snakebite, anthrax, and for relief of pain. In the 1930s, Echinacea became popular in both Europe and America as an herbal medicine. According to Wallace Sampson, MD, its modern-day use as a treatment for the common cold began when a Swiss herbal supplement maker was, quote, erroneously told, unquote, that Echinacea was used for cold prevention by Native American tribes who lived in the area of South Dakota. There's no record of that actually being used that way. Although Native American tribes didn't use Echinacea to prevent the common cold, some Plains tribes did use Echinacea to treat some of the symptoms that could be caused by the common cold. The Kiowa used it for coughs and sore throats, the Cheyenne for sore throats, the Pawnee for headaches, and many tribes, including Lakota, used it as an analgesic, pain-relieving medicine. Echinacea species were the most widely used medicinal plants among Plains indigenous peoples, with documented use by at least 15 to 19 tribes, as we mentioned earlier. Traditional applications included chewing the root for sore throats and a toothache, and topical use for wounds, burns, and insect and snake bites. The Kiowa and Cheyenne used it for sore throats, the Pawnee for headaches, the Lakota and others as a general pain remedy. So that's Native American traditional use. The PDR for herbal medicines, which is a relatively more, when it came out in 2007, is more modern. approach to herbal medicines. It says Echinacea is approved by Commission E for so we've talked about Commission E on previous episodes. So real quick, Commission E was something that was put together by the European Union, I think in the 1990s, and was a concerted scientific effort to look at herbs. And basically, herbs had to be approved by Commission E in order to be sold legally in Europe. So it's a big deal, and it indicates that there's some scientific consensus about its use, though it has not been updated for decades at this point. And while still kind of an important document, it's quite old at this point, and certainly up for some revisions and updates, but still important. So it says Echinacea is approved by Commission E for common cold, cough, bronchitis, fevers and colds, infections of the urinary tract, inflammation of the mouth and pharynx, tendency to infection, and wounds and burns. So it does do quite a bit of things. Okay. Echinacea purpurea herb is used internally as supportive therapy for colds and chronic infections of the respiratory tract and lower urinary tract. It can also be applied locally to poorly healing superficial wounds. This was all from the PDR for herbal medicines. And we continue. They continue to discuss unproven uses for the root, Echinacea purpurea root, used for acute and chronic respiratory tract infections of viral and bacterial origin, increased susceptibility to infection due to temporarily lowered resistance, treatment of leukopenia or too few white blood cells, following radio and cytostatic therapy, and in support of anti-infectious chemotherapy. So, in other words, for radiation and chemotherapy, as well as anti-infectious chemotherapy. Badal, Mikriath, and Clement, who wrote a book on pharmacology, say it is used internally as an adjuvant therapy and prophylaxis, so preventative of infections of the upper respiratory tract, and in parentheses, common colds, and externally for superficial wounds. So we are seeing a lot of that wound care coming into play here. WebMD, which is actually a pretty good, relatively scientific source, discusses the uses of Echinacea. Echinacea is used for many reasons. However, the benefits of Echinacea are not well defined. Some common reasons for using Echinacea include the following: to treat or prevent the common cold, to treat or prevent other infections in the nose or throat, and for eczema, also known as atopic dermatitis. Healthline, which I would consider to be useful but not as science-based as WebMD, says it may help the immune system lower blood sugar levels. So that's the first we're hearing about, lowering blood sugar levels. We'll hear a little bit more about that. Reduce anxiety, treat the skin, protect against cancer, and may be anti-inflammatory. The EBSCO Review Board, if you're familiar with EBSCO, they're a company that does scientific consulting. So this is, it's not a bad source. The EBSCO Review Board says, in addition to colds, Echinacea has been investigated for other uses, including treatment for chronic bronchitis and genital herpes. However, results are inconsistent. And Cooperman from consumerlab.com, I use him and this website as a source for a lot of my research. It's a fantastic, I kind of consider it like Consumer Reports for herbs and supplements. And basically what they do is they have great monographs on all kinds of different supplements, but then they go and they test usually about a dozen or two of the brands that are out there, which is a small portion of what's actually out there, but they go out and test them and come back and they approve them. They will say it's not approved, usually because it has contaminants or because it doesn't say what it doesn't, the amount of the ingredients are not what's on the label, either too high or too low. So it's really interesting. Yeah, I love Consumer Lab. It is a subscription service, but it's a fantastic. I encourage anyone who's very much into herbs to check out Consumer Lab. And they say, Cooperman says, who's the owner and he's an MD who writes most of what's on Consumer Lab, says it is primarily used for treating colds as well as anxiety. So that is Cooperman's approach on echinacea. And finally, under traditional uses, the White Rabbit Institute, which is an interesting website, has lots of information on herbs. And I love that it crosses between Western herbs and Chinese medicine. So you'll see that we'll refer back to them again when we talk about Chinese medicine and echinacea in Chinese medicine. So the White Rabbit Institute says echinacea is used to treat snake bite, anthrax, common colds, allergies, asthma, measles, whooping cough, tuberculosis, typhoid, meningitis, malaria, diphtheria, herpes, influenza, mumps, urinary tract infections, vaginal yeast infections, infections of the blood, genital herpes, joint pain, and where am I? Joint pain, lower blood pressure, and diabetes. And it's used topically for snake bites, stings, toothaches, and wounds. So let's talk about dosage and preparation. Cooperman says because echinacea products come in many forms and concentrations, the dosage will vary considerably depending on the product. Fugue Berman, who wrote a book, The 5-Minute Herbs and Dietary Supplement Consult, says dosage of the whole herb is 6 to 9 milliliters of expressed juice daily, or externally semi-solid preparations containing at least 15% pressed juice. That may sound like a weird way to phrase that, but by semi-solid presentations, they're saying things along the lines of like an ointment or a cream or something along those lines. The dosage of the root is 3,000 milligrams crude drug 3 times a day, or as a tincture 1 to 5 ethanol 55%, 60 drops 3 times per day. And the ad is not usually administered for more than 8 weeks. And that's probably something that's very important to kind of keep in mind. Here they're saying not for more than 8 weeks. Well, when we get to cautions and contraindications, we'll talk some more about that. Guerin, who wrote the book Western Herbs According to Traditional Chinese Medicine, A Practitioner's Guide, says it's a great book for crossing Western herbs and Chinese medicine. Says dosage is 3 to 9 grams in decoction and up to 300 grams in acute illness, 2 to 4 milliliters of tincture, or 1 to 3 grams of powdered extract. He adds in a note, for maximum effectiveness in severe acute disease, use frequent, moderate to large doses of echinacea. For less severe acute or more chronic cases, standard dosing is sufficient. Generally, I suggest, this is him saying this, generally I suggest that the patient take a large dose immediately, 4 to 8 milliliters, then take 1 to 3 milliliters every 30 to 60 minutes, depending on the severity of the illness. In other words, he's an advocate for pretty large doses of this. And in general, I am for herbs, especially for acute conditions like an infection. I would agree with that. Holmes, who wrote The Energetics of Western Herbs, says echinacea is prepared as a decoction or tincture, and the dosage is 6 to 10 grams in decoction and 2 to 4 milliliters of tincture at 1 to 2 strength in 50% ethanol. Now, if you don't understand that 1 to 5 and 55% or 1 to 2 and 50%, that's okay. That means you're probably not making your own tinctures. But also it's important because it's not acceptable just to say a tincture. You need to know the actual strength of that tincture. So it's important to have that information at your fingertips. Continuing with dosage and preparation, the PDR for herbal medicine says the dosage for the herb is the pressed juice is prepared in a concentration of 2.5 to 1 and is stabilized with 22% alcohol. Other complicated methods of preparation are known. This is a quote from them. When used internally, the recommended dosage is 6 to 9 milliliters of the expressed juice. Okay, so similar to other sources. In generally, it is probably best to use recommended doses on the preparations purchased, though increasing the dose is usually warranted. I have a whole lecture on Chinese herbal first aid, and in that, everything I say is like, okay, this is what's on the bottle. You need to increase that by at least 2 or 3 times for it to be an effective therapeutic dose. I think that, I don't know if I'd say 2 or 3 times, but usually what's on the bottle of these supplements is a safe dose, that if people take that, they're not going to have any ill effects from it, but it's not necessarily a therapeutic dose. So it may or may not help a person. And so more is usually warranted than what's on a bottle. Quality. The only description of quality raw products I could find comes from Western Herbs according to traditional Chinese medicine. That's that book by Guerin. Good quality dried Echinacea herbs should be green to dark green with little stem material. The flowers should have most of their purple rays attached with heads intact. The seeds should be brown, ranging from light to dark and not soft. The root dries to a blackish gray color. The sliced root, it has dark radiating lines. All parts should be numbing to the mouth and throat upon chewing. All right, let's talk about some Chinese medical actions. As this is a very popular Western herb, there are numerous descriptions of this herb in terms of Chinese medicine. There are numerous descriptions. That doesn't mean any of them are authoritative, that are, there's no real authority saying this is the Chinese medical approach to things. So kind of take all of these in and kind of come up, I think, with the Chinese medical actions that seem logical to you. Though I do say that I like Guerin's approach generally. He tends to be where I'd probably place a lot of these things. Which I can't always say about other sources. So Western herbs, according to traditional Chinese medicine, that's Guerin's book, says Echinacea is an herb that clears heat and is acrid, bitter, and cool in temperature and enters the lung, liver, and bladder. Its functions include clears heat, resolves toxins, and dispels wind, clears heat and transforms phlegm, clears heat and cools the blood, clears heat, drains fire, and stops bleeding, and cools heat and resolves toxins. Okay. The energetics of Western herbs, a materia medica integrating Western Oriental herbal medicine traditions. This is Holmes's book. It says Echinacea is pungent, salty, cool, and dry, and enters the lung, large intestine, and stomach. It says it clears toxic heat and reduces infection, fever, and inflammation, stimulates and regulates immunity, antidotes poison, and reduces allergy. It says it promotes detoxification and urination, reduces lymph congestion, relieves eczema, and reduces tumors, stops discharge. Promotes sweating, dispels wind heat, reduces fever, and promotes eruptions. Stimulate digestion and relieves abdominal fullness, and promotes tissue repair, clears decay, and relieves pain and swelling. So Holmes always has an interesting take on herbs, which I really appreciate. A lot of his functions are not really phrased in the way that I'm used to in Chinese medical terms. Some of them are, some of them aren't. They tend to be very there's a lot of they're very verbose, lots of words. So he's very clear because of all those words, but I don't know if I put it in the realm as I'd put it as more traditional sort of descriptors of all this. And then we have that White Rabbit Institute, which I really do appreciate for having, sort of both a Western and a Chinese viewpoint as well. They say Echinacea is called Zishu Hua in Chinese and is pungent, salty, cool, and dry, and enters the lung and spleen. They say it moves and tonifies blood, supports Wei Qi, clears toxins, resolves tumors, reduces inflammation, relieves pain, promotes tissue growth, releases to the exterior, clear wind heat, and as a kidney tonic. It is used for stuffy nose, sinus infections with drippy congestion, headache, fever, colds, flu, cough, malaria, typhoid, cholera, tuberculosis, asthma, joint pain, vaginal yeast infections, urinary tract infections, snake bites, cancer, wounds, enlivens lymph-promoting detoxification, and builds immunity. So let's talk about some comparisons and combinations. So most of the sources discuss all three species of Echinacea as medicinal, with most sources discussing them interchangeably, though a few say Echinacea pallida is the weakest medicinally. And so the other combination that you hear about sort of, in the zeitgeist is Echinacea and golden seal. And so that's sort of a common combination that you will see. Um, that's a combination that both we're going to see Echinacea and golden seal should not be taken long term. So that's something to be used short term with for colds. That's Echinacea and golden seal. But a lot of people will take that to prevent colds. Which, first of all, anytime we're taking something all the time, our body will accommodate it and will lose its effectiveness. But more that there's some dangers to taking those two herbs together long term. So it shouldn't be done. Western herbs, according to traditional Chinese medicine, discusses several combinations with white fringe tree bark for Xiaoyang disorders, or to add to minor blue plurum decoction. Xiao Chai Tang. So Xiaoyang is we've talked about that. That's one of the 6 stages, and we've talked about all 6 stages before. So that's an interesting approach to that. That's the half in, half out stage. With golden seal, here's golden seal and usnea. I guess that's a usnea for phlegm, heat in the lungs with thick yellow purulent sputum. And this combination is also useful for urinary turbidity due to damp heat. Another combination with trichosanthes fruit and fritillaria for phlegm, heat, coughing with thick yellow or green sputum. With isatis and leopard lily for febrile disease with painful or swollen sore throat due to fire toxin, or phlegm fire patterns. With coptis and plantain, I can never pronounce that properly, ground into a powder to make a paste for application to external wounds. With jade windscreen formula, or yuping feng song, which is a common Chinese herbal formula for prophylactic use when there's a threat of contracting an illness from family or a patient. So jade windscreen is usually used to help build wei qi to prevent frequent colds and flus. And here we're adding in echinacea, which I think would be a perfect combination with jade windscreen. But I like the way you put it, when there is a threat of contracting illness from family or a patient. So in other words, short term, not long term again. And then finally, with honeysuckle and forsythia powder, yin xiaosang, which is one of our classic formulas in Chinese medicine for colds, specific type of colds, to strengthen its ability to clear heat and resolve toxins. This is an effective and potent addition to an already valuable formula. And I would agree with that. I think that would be a great combination. You actually can buy that combination over the counter as well. Puchalski and their team say more than, we're talking about contents now. That was our combinations. Let's talk about contents in here of what is in Echinacea. So Puchalski and their team say more than 20 acrylamides have been identified. These are mostly isobutyl amides of unsaturated fatty acids. The only constituents shown to cross the intestinal barrier into the bloodstream. That's an interesting one, and it's kind of a big statement. They are thought the alkylamides are thought to drive much of the immune activity. There are also caffeic acid derivatives, including caicoric acid, the major phenolic in Echinacea purpurea, iconocoside, chlorogenic acid, and caphtoric acid. So those are all caffeic acid derivatives. Additionally, there are polysaccharides and glycoproteins, mainly found in freshly pressed juice and aqueous extracts, proposed to support phagocytic or immune cell activities. Phagocytic means cell eating, which is types of an immune cell, though poorly absorbed orally. So that's an interesting thing. So even though it has these things, just taking it in, it's hard to get it into your system. Finally, in contents, the PDR for herbal medicines discusses each of these constituents and many others, including volatile oils, flavonoids, polyenes, and ferulic acid derivatives. So let's talk about the science. what is the science looking like with echinacea? So despite Commission E promoting the use of echinacea for upper respiratory tract symptoms, clinical trial results have been mixed. A Cochrane review. So if you listen to me, you know that I like meta-analyses and systematic reviews. That's where you are looking at multiple studies and kind of putting them together to make much stronger studies out of it. Cochrane Library is one of one of those places for strong meta-analyses, and they have a very specific protocol that you have to go through in order to be in the library. And so it's a great source. In other words, though, some of them may be older, like we're talking 2014, which isn't old at this point, but it's getting there. A Cochrane review analyzed 24 double-blind trials with 4,631 participants, comparing echinacea mono preparation, so just echinacea alone, to placebo, and concluded, this is their conclusion, echinacea products have not been shown to so in this study, have not here been shown to provide benefits for treating colds, although it is possible there is a weak benefit from some echinacea products. The results of individual prophylaxis trials consistently show positive, if non-significant, trends, although potential effects are of questionable clinical relevance. So there you go. They didn't find a lot for treating colds. Another earlier meta-analysis by Shaw and their team concluded published evidence supports echinacea's benefit in decreasing the incidence and duration of the common cold. So that was 2007. I think, between 2007 and 2014, there were probably several more studies come in, which the Cochrane study looked at. And meta-analyses can be well done or not well done. So again, I think Cochrane Library is generally quite well done. Several sources discuss the difficulty in studying echinacea given the number of species, botanical parts, different manufacturers, doses, and preparations. I'm not sure why this is a particular issue with this herb as opposed to any other herb, but several sources mention this as an issue here. There are also myriad individual studies, many funded by manufacturers, again, showing mixed results. And that is from Cooperman. That's the consumerlab.com. And the studies looking at anxiety show minimal positive results. They were very small studies, and they showed it was very difficult to show any positive results there for anxiety use, for the use of anxiety. Finally, the EBSCO review board says scientific evidence regarding the effectiveness remains mixed. And this was 2024, so this is just a couple of years ago. Some studies suggest that echinacea may help reduce the severity of cold symptoms and accelerate recovery if taken at the first sign of illness, but it has not been shown to prevent colds or provide general immune support reliably. So I think that is pretty good summary of where we are with the science at this point. So, all right, let's look at drug-herb interactions. A literature search did not find major drug interactions with echinacea. A couple of studies looked at patients taking HIV drugs and found no interactions between echinacea and etravirine or darunavir and ritonavir. Neither of those. So not really worried at this point about HIV medication, at least these three that we're talking about here. The American Family Physician says that's a journal, says there are, and it's an association as well, says there are conflicting results, however, about effects on cytochrome P451A2 and 3A4, potentially with even short-term use. For this reason, caution should be taken when combining echinacea with medications that are metabolized by either of these CYP enzymes, including antipsychotic and antidepressant medications. So it did seem mixed to me on the CYP1A2 and 3A4. 3A4 is the most, so cytochrome is often discussed as a risk factor for drug-herb interactions. And so if it interferes with that, that's how drugs get metabolized. And 3A4 subtype, cytochrome P450 subtype 3A4 is the most common subtype used by drugs. About 40 to 60% of drugs utilize 3A4. 1A2, I think, is the third or fourth most commonly used one. So it's down in like the 10% range, 5 to 10%. The drugs will use that subtype, but the 3A4 is an issue. So maybe a little bit of concern around that. There's enough here that I would suggest you follow my general advice when combining drugs with herbs, which is start low, go slow. Start a low dose of herbs and slowly increase them to therapeutic doses. Some more on drug-herb interactions. Freeman and Spellman concluded, given our findings, the estimated risk of taking echinacea products, 1 in 100,000, the number of echinacea doses consumed yearly, more than 10 million, the number of adverse events, less than 100, and that the majority of use is short-term, echinacea purpurea products, roots and or aerial parts do not appear to be a risk to consumers. A very small, n equals 12. So 12 patients. Remember, we need at least 30 to 40 for it to be able for us to apply population statistics to it. So this is a pilot study. This is like, okay, we need to do more research. But a very small clinical study concluded caution should be used when echinacea is co-administered with drugs dependent on cytochrome P 453A or 1A2 for their elimination. So again, really small, but it's a clinical study, which we don't have a lot of with drug-herb interactions. Finally, the American Herbal Products Association's Botanical Safety Handbook says all major species of Echinacea are in interaction class A, herbs for which no clinically relevant interactions are expected. I think overall, reading all this, I don't think there's a lot of evidence for 3A4 and 1A2, cytochrome P453A4 and 1A2 interactions, but there's some indications, so we do need to be a little bit wary, but in general, I think we're probably pretty good. And if you start low, go slow, you're probably pretty safe using this with drugs. But that's not to say there aren't some concerns. So let's talk about some concerns. The NCCIH, which is the National something Commission or something for Integrative Health, which is from the National Institute of Health in the U.S. So it's probably the leading research arena for complementary and alternative medicine. The NCCIH says Echinacea is likely safe for most adults to consume products with extracts of E. purpurea and some mixtures of E. purpurea and E. augustifolia for short periods of time. However, some people have allergic reactions to Echinacea, which may be severe. The most common side effects of Echinacea are digestive tract symptoms such as abdominal pain, nausea, or stomach pain. So there you go. And allergic reactions make sense. This is daisy family. People have allergies to daisies. The Merck Manual Professional Edition says most adverse effects are mild and transitory. They include dizziness, fatigue, headache, and gastrointestinal symptoms. Echinacea should be avoided in patients with autoimmune disorders, multiple sclerosis, advanced HIV infection, tuberculosis, and organ transplants because it may stimulate T cells. Allergic reactions are possible in patients with allergies to ragweed, chrysanthemum, marigold, daisies, or related allergens. The PDR for herbal medicines has some contraindications. Because of a possible activation of autoimmune aggressions and other overreactive immune responses, the drug should not be administered in the presence of tuberculosis, multiple sclerosis, leukosis, which is a condition of too many white blood cells, collagen,osis, which is collagen issues, AIDS or HIV infection, and other autoimmune diseases. Parenteral administration, which means outside of oral, should not be used in patients with tendencies to allergies, especially allergies to members of the composite family or the Asteraceae family. The American Herbal Products Association's Botanical Safety Handbook says Echinacea is in safety class 1, herbs that can be safely consumed when used appropriately. So that's important. From a more Chinese medical perspective, Guerin says prolonged use of an herb with this nature could injure the yin and blood humors, therefore use caution in extended therapy. And Holmes says, although Echinacea root belongs in the mild, non-toxic category of remedies, it is quite stimulating by nature. In rare cases, it may cause mild dizziness, nausea, mild throat irritation, joint pain, or gastric upset. Overall, my biggest concern, I think, with Echinacea is people thinking that it prevents colds rather than treats colds. It is not a preventer, it is a treater. So it should be used while you need to use it, and then it should not be used after that. So long-term use of this is probably not a good idea in general, especially since a lot of brands combine it with Golden Seal, and that combination, probably more on the Golden Seal side, but still that combination can actually injure the liver with long-term use. So you do want to keep this in the relatively short. What is short? Well, weeks are probably fine. I wouldn't go more than that. We had the one that said up to 8 weeks, I think. Okay, in summary, we started our discussion today by discussing artificial intelligence in the realm of herbs. From there, we trekked into one of the most commonly used Western herbs, purple coneflower or Echinacea purpurea. Its chemistry gives a plausible, if not fully mapped basis for immune activity, though the clinical evidence for preventing or treating the common cold remains weak and inconsistent across meta-analyses. It appears reasonably safe for short-term use in healthy adults, but caution is warranted for allergy-prone individuals, those with autoimmune conditions, and long-term continuous use. Overall, another interesting herb that seems useful, but still needs more research. We've seen that quite a bit. In our next episode, we will be exploring another A-list and very important Chinese herb, huangqi, Astragalus radix, or astragalus root. This herb is in the Chinese medical subcategory of herbs that tonify the qi under the category of tonifying herbs. It is one of the most important herbs in our pharmacopoeia, maybe even a top 10 herb. Maybe. It is important for tonifying the spleen, qi, and blood, and raising yang, and more. And as usual, we will be exploring something a little different. Please join us for this engrossing episode. See you in 2 weeks. And I would like to say thank you very much for joining us today. If you like this podcast, please do us a humongous favor. Give us a 5-star rating in your favorite podcast app. And we appreciate you even thinking about doing that. Thank you very much. Don't forget our amazing continuing education deal at www.integrativemedicinecouncil.org/CEUS1. So if you need continuing education, check that out, integrativemedicinecouncil.org/CEUS1. And you can always get in touch with me at drgreg@spurbsherbs.com or at our website, www.spurbsherbs.com. That's Spurbs Herbs, SPERBSHERBS.com. And as usual, we have quite the bibliography today. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.